Julia Kunin lives in Brooklyn, New York, and works frequently in Hungary. She earned a BA from Wellesley College and an MFA from the Mason Gross School of the Arts, Rutgers University. Her work explores themes of queerness, feminism, and the body. Her ceramic sculptures reference Hungarian ceramics made at the Zsolnay factory both during the Art Nouveau period and during the Socialist era. She recently had a solo exhibition at Klaus Gallery, New York, New York, and she has exhibited nationally and internationally at Mindy Solomon Gallery, Miami, Florida, Seven Sisters Gallery, Houston, Texas, Kate Werbel Gallery, New York, New York, Mother Gallery, New York, New York, AMOCA, Los Angeles, California, and LACMA, Los Angeles, California, among many others. Kunin was a Fulbright Scholar to Hungary in 2013. She has received numerous grants, residencies, and fellowships, including at the MacDowell Colony, Yaddo, the CORE program in Houston, Texas, and Skokenhagen. She is a member of the board of FIRE, the LGBTQ Fire Island Artist Residency. She has a design project with Ralph Pucci International, and she also finds time for writing projects and being an educator. As a fellow Ingles Luster artist, please help me welcome Julia Kunin.
Okay. Wow, that light is very bright. But really, thank you so much for inviting me to Cranbrook. So far, my visit has been phenomenal. I really feel welcomed, and I've really enjoyed going to the graduate students' studios and Ian seeing your work and just learning about the history, the rich, rich history of Cranbrook, and really enjoying the beauty of it. Is this mic in the right spot for me? I just want to make sure. And the light is a little bright on me. I don't know if anything can be done for that. A cap? Thank you. This will really make my look. No, is... I don't know if that spot is necessary. Oh, I'll wait, Ian, see if you can do anything, because I'll take it if there's no other solution. Very definitely. Thank you. And get rid of the spot. Oh, good. Okay, well, you can hear.
Oh, not so good.
Motion activated.
Better.
Okay. What's?
There's some presets they're trying to
That's good.
thread, I think.
Thank you very much. I think that's perfect. Okay.
How's that?
Perfect.
That's good for you?
Yes. Thank you. So, as I said, I'm very, very happy to be here. This is just a picture of me in my studio and surrounded by some recent work. But, you know, we don't start from nowhere. We start somewhere. And I just wanted to acknowledge Hideo Okino, who is a Japanese-Hawaiian potter who ran the pottery program at the University of Vermont in the 70s. He studied with Toshiko, and he often spoke about her. So in a way, I feel like that's a thread that also connects me to Cranbrook. In addition, in the 70s, I used to hang out on the University of Vermont campus. I was an apprentice in a theater group when I was 13 and 14, and granted, my dad was a professor there, so I felt comfortable on the campus. But I found the pottery shop by chance. There was a door open, and there were stairs leading to the basement. I went down and found this wonderful world, and I would sit and watch the potters. And somebody offered me clay in exchange for babysitting, and that's how it started. And then Hideo noticed that I was there, and he just said, "How would you like to work here?" And I said, "Great." And working just meant doing my own work every summer from, like, say, 14, 15, 16, and coming up when they did raku firings and such, and I was really taken under the wing of these wonderful potters. The dishes are not Hideo's, they're George Scatchard's, but it's what I grew up with, the 70s pottery that I love. I hated it at one point, and now I love it. Okay, so this I'm showing you just because, will this link up okay?
Give this clay body.
Okay,
so if
I want to just,
this,
it's weird to hear my voice and this voice at the same time. So let me just go to 8:14. The reason I'm showing you this is I did a video for the MoMA, And they wanted a lot. They wanted the basic clay skills for someone who knows nothing about clay, and to incorporate works from the MoMA, but I wanted you to know it exists. And this is just...
Gravity is pushing down on this thing. I did a bunch of sketches. Sometimes I'll work for weeks and days until I get to the right sketch. But the truth is, no matter how much I sketch and pre-think, the work ultimately changes as I am working and new ideas come in.
Okay, that was just a taste of it because I haven't put any drawings in my... Now, how do I get back to my... I need the attack now. Whoops. How do I pressed escape. I want to go back to my slideshow. Yikes.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Let's go back up to...
History?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right there. This...
Yeah, great. Slideshow. Okay. Great. So this I'm just showing you just to show that this is one of a recent piece that I made that I'm excited about, and nothing is better, I think, than when it's still wet clay. Now we're going to jump to how did I get there? I did a lot of clay in high school and college, and then I basically rejected it because I thought, this is just mud, brown stuff. I'm not interested in this folksy hippie thing anymore. You know, clay was really a religion for a lot of people in the 70s. And so I was in Houston in what's called the core program, and I started to do I had done bronze casting before, but I did some. Now this is a tiny, small, these are goblets about this big. But the reason I'm showing them is because I started to do things that were doubled. I started doubling to talk about homoeroticism and a coded homoeroticism in a relationship in the 80s when nobody was talking about this. Nobody was writing about queer abstraction, but this was my impulse to try to figure out a way how to express this lesbian desire at the time. However, I was, very much a romantic. This is, of course, influenced by Louise Bourgeois. I was young, so, it's clear. But the idea with the goblets is that if you pour liquid in the goblet, it will come out of the eyes. And it was also about the idea of a love potion in the opera Tristan and Isolde, whereby they could only fall in love if they drank this potion, but if they drank it, they would die. So it was kind of my exploration on love and death and ecstasy. And Georges Bataille is somebody to read for that. Jump to, I was making found objects in a sense, jump to using found objects, and still trying to figure out how to express something about female sexuality without betraying the body itself so that it couldn't be exploited. So I found these eggs, and since I didn't grow up with Easter, I was really fascinated by the idea of blowing out the eggs. Then I dipped them in wax, then they looked like nipples, then I made leather holsters, sewed the leather holster to the wood. To the right is what it's just called egg mask, which is, very suggestive, and it's still one of my favorite pieces. It hasn't quite fallen apart yet. And the masking, of course, has to do with identity, whether you cover your identity, whether you reveal your identity, and going further. I need my water. So this piece is the beginning of a body of work that I was really excited about, and I actually started it in graduate school, because then again, you're talking about found objects. What found objects are suggestive? What is going to inspire me? I found a saddle in a flea market, and then I found another, and I realized when they were sitting around in my studio that I'd been working with red suede, and they needed to be upholstered with red suede, but it needed to be perfect. There was no way it couldn't be. So I found a leather worker who upholstered it for me. And that was the first time that I actually engaged someone else to help me with the work. And that was very liberating. And I gradually did learn the skills myself. This is sort of the idea of the giant sex toy. It's very body. What's important is you can smell the suede when you walk in the room. It's very sensory, it's very sensual, it's funny, it's how do I bring people into this concept of desire with humor? And the other thing I want to say is there's a skin on it, a literal skin, and I pay homage really to Merritt Oppenheim's teacup because what she did was cover a teacup with fur, and it's transformed immediately, or Marcel Duchamp, transformation, turn it upside down. And I was really excited that it was on the cover of this book that has a funny title, Damn Fine Art, by new lesbian artists who are new. I don't know, the new art or the new lesbians, who knows. But it was exciting because this was a moment, and I've had this conversation with some students, where the work doesn't look political necessarily when you look at it, but this appeared in a gay and lesbian bookshop on Hudson Street in New York City, in the window. And I thought, oh my God, I've made it. This is it. This was my goal. This is what I want to do. This is the activism that I was looking for. Because books are much more, of course, democratic than exhibitions, I think. And I'm going to bring in Harmony Hammond here because she was somebody that I looked up to before I met her. I ended up meeting her. She ended up putting me in another lesbian book. But if you look at Harmony's work, she is doubling as well. She is taking two identical objects and creating a homoerotic relationship just by the symmetry involved. And of course, the hole in the middle, which was a very 70s feminist archetypal way to think about female sexuality. And yet it's also a skin, it's binding, it's wrapping. So she also was interested in the sensual and the skin and the tightness of it. And then again, I have my doubling here. And this is when I had to learn how to upholster myself. This faded because it was in bad lighting. I've stored these since in a dark area in plastic bags. And they're going to be shown again, which is remarkable. But so this was sort of my taking the saddles and saying, now what am I going to do? I'm going to invent a sex organ. I'm going to, and the sex organ can look benign or not. It can make fun of Judy Chicago's dinner party, which I first loved in 1979 when I saw it. Then I loathed it for many reasons because it was, oh my God, every woman's a vagina, please, you know. And it was too essentialist, but it was also limited. It got a lot of criticism. But then come back to today, and I really, really, really thank her for this work. And she worked with a lot of China painters. She revived a lot of women's crafts. She worked in collaboration. So Crimson Blossom is the closest I think I have to that Judy Chicago plate. This is about this big, well, wingspan, 3 feet. And I had a fellowship in Germany at the time. And I went to this shoe and leather museum in Offenbach. They ended up buying the piece. But I have to say that when I walked into this shoe and leather museum, imagine, this smells like suede in a room. When you walk into that kind of museum, it smelled like old shoes. You could smell the people that wore those shoes. It was very, very eerie. And the other strange coincidence is that my grandfather, my mother's father, were Jewish. He fought for the Germans in World War I. He was in the shoe business, and it was basically destroyed in 1933. So there's more to that story. It had a tragic end. However, I was able to be in Germany and get through it. My mother came for 2 days. My uncle would not step foot. There's more to that story. It was a great experience, and I do speak German, and I do love the language. The reason I show this piece, this is actually, I was talking to someone, like I did cast iron, and then I didn't like the rustic look, and I flocked it, which is kind of absurd, where you go to the crazy extent to do cast iron and do this. But the reason I wanted to show you it is because of the keyhole. These are really handheld size. And they're meant to be, you know, again, this is the 1990s. We're trying to go for a lesbian visibility, sex-positive imagery. I wasn't the only one doing this. Other people in my department in grad school were doing it, you know, this kind of work. And it was during the AIDS crisis, so you're trying to find a positive way to talk about sexuality despite the death around us. And you can see they're like sex toys, but the keyhole is about looking. We've all studied the male gaze. Well, that was when that language became familiar to me in the 90s. I heard the word queer for the first time in 1991 when there was an MLA conference at Rutgers. That's English professors, mainly. So the keyhole comes back. And it's cornball as hell. I mean, that's also what draws me to this and to the kitsch, is that you can't take it too seriously. But then I reached a point, and I don't know what time it is, and I hope I'm still doing well, that I really felt that I'd said everything about sexuality that I could. I've gone pretty quickly through this. I did a lot of work that I'm not showing. And then what do? You feel like, oh God, it's over. So what I decided to do is take a glass class just to have a new material to kind of, when you bring the freshness to the material, you also often bring fresh ideas if you've never used it before. And I decided to take a class in cast glass. And I didn't know about Delchahuli at the time. So my thought was, what works with glass? Octopi work with glass because they move, because they change color, because, and then because they, for me, were non-binary. Nobody was using that word then either. The words that I used to describe it was not both female and male in one creature. And then I really loved this print by Hokusai, which is called The Fisherman's Wife, in which if a woman can't be satisfied by her husband, she can be satisfied by an octopus. So I basically did these walls of octopi, but it really didn't satisfy me. I wanted to pile the octopi up, and I will get to that. But I didn't know how to do it in glass. I was not going to spend 10 years of my life learning how to do hot glass. And I thought, okay, clay. I saw a show of Ah Huan at the Asia Society in 2002, possibly, and said, okay, clay can be art. I'm going to do that. And then I thought, I need to make a mold of an octopus. How am I going to do that? So I knew of a pottery shop in Williamsburg, and I just walked in. Because, the great thing about ceramics is the accessibility. I had had that experience as a kid. And I've had a lot of angels helping me in the past. And I went in and I said, can somebody here tell me how to make a mold of an octopus? So Chris Russell said, oh yes, he showed me the Palissy book. And I was blown away. And he said, yes, I'll show you how to make a press mold. Just, can you make tiles for me for a day? So I said, okay, that's kind of the traditional apprenticeship, right? And so as a result, I made a press mold of an octopus, and I did pile them up. And it was really thrilling to be able to use something that was emanating from a realistic object and create something abstract. And I think I'm still going back and forth with that realism and abstraction in my own work. This was about this big. So what it started to look like was landscape, the idea of a miniature world, and the miniature world that was almost frightening because of the tentacles, the monstrous, the mysterious, the unknown, but also related to the bonsai, which is the calm, meditative, miniature world that you can enter into. Sort of, why did I do this? I was living in New York City. I grew up in Vermont, and I think I needed nature. But the Palissy ware I went crazy over. Then I started reading all about Meissen and Sèvres, and continued with porcelain. These are just some of the pieces that I made that, I don't know if you know the movie Picnic at Hanging Rock. It's a great, classic, mysterious, lesbian, slight subtext. At that time, we're searching in the films to see ourselves. These are everything's about this big. I know it looks gigantic. So it's the piling, but then I was interested in this lava glaze and kind of creating this creature-like thing. I had a show at Greenberg Van Doren Gallery in 2007, and I was used to showing in art galleries, and they really took a risk with showing me because the only person that was showing clay around that time was Anne Agee and maybe Kathy Butterly, in the art world, that is, that I knew of. I mean, there were probably many more, but this is what my knowledge was. And I named my shows after novels because, even though a bit lofty, and it was a two-person show with the painter, Emi Avora. We named it this because we were both interested in decadence, this idea of artifice and making something. Huysmans' book, I highly recommend. It's not about plot as much as it is about description of the artifice that the main character des Esseintes creates for himself as a response to industrialization, as a sense of control. And he bought a tortoise, and he covered its shell with jewels, such that the tortoise could move through the house and have all the lights reflecting everywhere. The tortoise, poor tortoise, died because the jewels were too heavy. So I made this tortoise, and it's different from that. And it's covered with snail shells, which was another obsession of mine, snails and snail sexuality. I'd seen films of, I had to go see snails mate because of a short story by Patricia Highsmith called The Snail Watcher. And I highly recommend you read it, because what happens is this man's obsessed with snails. They start taking over his study and his couch and his chair, and they take over the chandelier, and he walks in one day and the chandelier falls on him because it's too heavy with the snails. So it's like this love and death again theme arriving. But of course, the turtle carrying the world is a theme that you'll see across many, many cultures. I won't go into that. You can look it up, I'm sure. And then I'm interested in grottos, because Palissy designed grottos. Again, we have the miniature worlds. I'm using commercial glazes here, by the way, just low fire glazes to get the bright colors. And then I go to Kohler, and they have terrible colors. Now you can go and bring your own glazes, but then it was pastel. And one of the things that I figured out was that I marbled the clay. I cast these lobsters, and I marbled it, and then I carved back into it to create the look of agate ware. I was very much taken with that. And these are lobsters, so this wave is thin, and it kind of goes like that. It's pretty big. I highly recommend you apply to Kohler, and it's super strong ceramic. And since I knew I was going to be bringing forms to have cast, and I'd never done slip casting before Kohler, I'd only done press molds, I brought the elephant foot. I was interested in the history of natural history museums, and how can I take the animal imagery and go bigger and maybe add a different meaning to it. So this is called Gift. This was actually taken from a real rhinoceros foot that I bought on eBay that was an umbrella stand. It's a horrific thought. I'm not an animal rights fanatic, but the metaphor for me is brutal because it has more to do with also exploiting Africa and other countries. So Gift in German means poison, and it has that dual meaning. So, you can take a gift, give a gift. And the gold, to me, just symbolized the exploitation of the Congo or of other peoples. I know that sounds general, but I read this book called King Leopold's Ghost, which is all about the Congo, which I also highly recommend. But this was the breakthrough for me, because what I was trying to do was figure out how not to cover up all of the wrinkles in the skin. Because again, skin was really important to me as a way to change the meaning of something. As soon as I lustered this gold, it became another object. That's all I did to it. Well, I reproduced it in clay, but still. And so then I was on my search for luster. And I'm getting there, but I did use a lot of commercial lusters, and the smell was terrible, and it's toxic, and I couldn't stand it, and had a lot of failures, things that I didn't like. There's a whole body of work here that I'm not showing. I suppose I could have a show called Failures, but, we'll move forward. And then I wanted to go to Hungary. This is where we get into Hungary. And this is the Zsolnay factory work that let me just backtrack. I wanted to go to Hungary because, again, I needed a shift in my work. And I found out they used beautiful porcelain from Herend at this place called Kecskemét. Herend still creates little tchotchkes. During the socialist era, they were one factory that was allowed to make these bourgeois objects. But at the same time, when I knew I was going, I went to the Strand, and that was my Google, and I just would sit there. It's a secondhand bookstore, and I pulled out books, and I found a book on Zsolnay, and it blew me away. And I will tell you and show you the piece that did it for me, but I needed to show you this because they had a period of historicism where they were established in 1853. Palissy worked in the, 1600s, or maybe it was you can correct me, maybe 16th century. But there were families of people who copied palissyware, and they did too. This is the grounds of the factory, which is just spectacular. The family home, it was a family-run factory started by Vilmos, and then his son Miklos took over. The daughters did a lot of the designing, and even one of the son-in-laws was an engineer. This was ruined during the socialist era, and not ruined, changed. They were relegated to making sewer pipes and insulators. But what they did do was make lots of one-of-a-kind, phenomenal, strange pieces. And they won awards at World's Fairs, like the Turin World's Fair, the Rome World's Fair, Paris World's Fair. And that's how they made a name for themselves, even though they made dishes and such. And when I saw this psychedelia, I said, this is so contemporary. Does this factory still exist? I want to try this. And I found out that it did, and I was introduced in 2009 to someone who used to work at the factory. And that's where my adventure began with Hungary, in a sense. And the reason I put this slide in is, Kevin, this is the Hungarian pavilion in Venice. So if you ever see Zsolnay, you might see this if you go to the Venice Biennial. And that archway is made up of tiles, but the whole thing was designed by Géza Marotti. Marotti was brought here by Saarinen, which I just learned, and that blew me away, because he did so many important buildings in Hungary, the Grecian Palace, and he designed the displays for the World's Fair. He designed this fountain of ducks, which I didn't show, but I realized I'd been looking at Géza Marotti's work and not knowing about the connection. And now there's a book out about him in the pavilion, and my best friend is going to curate a show we wanted for the Architectural Biennial about Zsolnay in the Zsolnay Pavilion. And hopefully my work will be included. He said he wants to. And these, you'll see shafts of wheat, sheaves of wheat, and that Marotti has a piece here, several at Cranbrook.
Quite a bit. And he did the Fisher lobby, the Fisher building.
Yeah, okay, great. And I really want to see that. I just have to make that concrete connection. It was really exciting to me. So I got a foot in the door through a friend who kindly let me use his studio because I couldn't work in the factory. And now I am definitely using, this is the most Art Nouveau glaze that I was ever able to achieve at the factory. They glazed it for me. I asked for matte. They use an acid process to make it matte. And then I'm combining nature, imageries of nature with the monstrous again, but in a more direct way, conjuring a real figure or a monster. And these are named, okay, 25 minutes? These are named after Rabelaisian figures that were scatological and funny and made fun of the French government. But I was interested in the idea of monster, the idea of other. How do I express an otherness, but at the same time desire, the grotesque and desire? And this was achieving the Holy Grail. This, for me, this is the detail from it. I don't know how it looks expanded like this. Oh, not as beautiful as on the computer. There's tons of interior mirroring. It's like so bright. And you'll see butterflies, and then I use the scaffolding. And that's where I begin to think about architecture entering into the work in combination with the figure. And this is just the name of the show that was at Greenberg Van Doren that had my first luster work in it. And I'm throwing this slide in because I want you to get a sense of the Zsolnay tiles. They are all over the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They are very fantastical. I went to Serbia and saw this synagogue before it had been renovated, and now it's quite a jewel box. Zsolnay did the roof tiles and the other ceramic ornaments. And in the factory when I was there, a friend of mine who's still in the pewter granite tile factory was doing some of the renovation. So I was really excited to see the renovation that she did, Angela. And There are synagogues standing still in Hungary because it was one of the last countries to be invaded by Hitler in World War II. Long story. Now, socialist art. I'm throwing this in. This is Szeged. It's monumental. I'm throwing it in not because I support the propaganda or the dogma, but because she's a goddess. She's like the goddess of art, of agriculture. They do still have this festival of the bread. And she looks so strong and powerful. And of course, that was propaganda as well. The happy worker, the happy collective farmer when they were really miserable in reality. And this is my friend Danish, Vekete Danish, who has since, at the time he was working in a sunglasses factory. So we were playing around. And this is like the sculpture to the ideal worker. And he's standing on an insulator. Now he's a curator, artist, amazing. I met him in 2013. This was the studio at the factory that I was able to work in. You see all those old molds? I was surrounded by them. I was like really under the radar in the basement. And they use slip. So I had to figure out how, I don't want to slip cast my work. So I decided to create sheets, which I know people with porcelain had done, so that's how I figured it out. If you want to make a really, really thin translucent sheet in porcelain, pour the slip. Well, I did that with this slip, it's because it has no body. You can't build with it. And I needed this, oops, let me skip that one. Oh, there's me pouring. I know you guys know this is not news to you of how to pour into a mold, but that's the slip, the color of the slip that works with the glaze. And I had been doing scholars' rocks. And these are the rocks that I found on my walks. Again, other artists have used rocks. I remember in the 70s, people used to make rock pots, right? Little weed pots with rock form. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take the rock to another place. And I knew the texture would be perfect with the glaze on the rock. And that bottom, it's just this high. The bottom is like a puddle of slip. And it's just being able to puddle and puddle and puddle, and then let the drips of the slip create also more texture. And there was my interest in scholars' rocks reappearing. Like the bonsai, the idea of the miniature world. I have not yet been to Japan, and it is high on my list. But I really want to see the gardens, the rock gardens there. Now, the reason I show you this is just to show you the detail. I wanted to make something big, and the only way I could figure out was how to do it was through sections and hang it. And Michael Lucero, who you may or may not have heard of, ages ago did that. So I was thinking, oh, Michael Lucero did it, I'm gonna try it. I mean, you see, we're always taking from something, right? And there's this airline cable, and there are little segments that fit like beads on the airline cable, but I realized it was too tall, you couldn't even appreciate the top of it. So when I installed it later, I installed it lower. And there you see the keyhole emerging again, and architecture and locks and keys. I was very taken with the wall of locks I saw in the town of Page, where the factory exists. Let me say that I've been going back to this town to do my work every summer since 2009 and more, renting an apartment, working now at the university, sometimes in the factory when I could, sometimes at friends' studios. And I didn't just get things glazed by the factory. I worked with a potter who was an expert in glazed lusters. And Alex's work is amazingly impressive. And nobody would teach it to me in 2009. There were no books that I could read about it at the time. Anyway, that's a long story. So I've been collaborating with people to get my glaze. And this is just an example of sponges piling up and making a grotto. I don't recommend it now because these are done by burnout. We did it in an outdoor kiln. The beauty of it was that porcelain really worked with this because it was strong enough to deal with all the holes in the sponge. And the exciting part was even if the clay dried, you could still keep piling stuff on it because it kept absorbing it. And this is another one. These are like this high. They seemed enormous to me at the time. I'm just showing you a variety. Now, the thing was I reached another point. I'd made the sponge pieces. I had made the scholars' rocks. And somebody said to me, oh, your work reminds me of bismuth. And I said, well, bismuth is in the glaze. And then I looked up what a bismuth crystal looked like, and that's what it looked like. And that led me to my next body of work. And I said, I need to make a portrait or a head in the shape or with the bismuth crystal form. So I made all these little crystal, ziggurat type things and assembled them. This is about this high. And that was another exciting moment. And then all of a sudden it becomes architectural, even more so. Then you're looking, oh, it's sort of Art Deco-ish with its ziggurats and its, kind of thing, yeah. This I'm showing you because this was exciting to me. At LACMA, purchased this work, but they showed it with two pieces from their collection that had really influenced my work. The Jaulnay vase on the left, the Palissy ware in the middle, my work that combines the idea of the rock and the Art Nouveau interest in nature. I haven't even talked about the psychedelic, but that was definitely part of it. And the wonder of nature that you'll see throughout all Art Nouveau work. Get back to the factory grounds. There are old kilns and fun passageways to explore. It's a big old, a lot of it's abandoned. A friend of mine found this huge relief in the factory, and I was so excited to see it. In the 70s, in the factory worked with artists to create what they called wall pictures. I don't know what happened to this. It's not there anymore. And I decided to make these wall reliefs. Again, my show was named after a book, Les Guerrières, by Monique Wittig, who is now being republished. She's a French author. She's sadly no longer alive. And this was a book about, at the time, female warriors, Amazonian-like. It's like an epic poem. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to make a series of portraits of these warriors. And then this is my version of taking socialist art forms that makes fun of Picasso, or they might look like bad Picassos, and then making my own version of a bad Picasso. And I was mad as hell. I was in Hungary, finally actually living there during my Fulbright for 7 months. And so all of a sudden, I did have to deal with homophobia. I did have to deal with sexism. I did have to deal with anti-Semitism. I did. I was closeted completely as much as I could be because, as I said, I'd work better under the radar. But I also had a lot of friendships, tons of friendships, and so you're out to certain friends. And then what do? I brought back the body. I brought back sexuality more directly. Said, okay, I got to do this. And at the time, in the United States, we were fine. We could just point the finger at Orban, who's become a dictator. And I also started collecting socialist work. And when I bought this work, you can see the direct influence with the breast. This is the interesting thing. Furtus George worked at the factory. And when I bought this piece, I thought, oh, this is just a multiple that, people made in the factory to put in people's homes. He worked for the government, he worked for the factory, he made what he was told to make. I showed it to my Hungarian teacher, and she said, no, that's not the case. She said, this looks like his second wife. And they were very much in love. And the lovebird in Hungarian folk art is a symbol of love, and it is in many cultures. But Furtus, on the side, did very sort of interesting protest, I would call them protest art. And he made what he wanted to make, even though it may not have been shown. So you can see him, he did a whole series, he's like trying to get out of the prison or the window. And on the right, he's making fun of the local paper by folding it into a clown hat. If you can imagine that, that is actually pushing a limit with political work. And I wish that he was more known in this country. He's no longer alive. So going back to my own wall pieces, and really excited about using key imagery. I know I have to speed up. Oh my God, I have to speed up so much. I love Marsden Hartley because he fills his work with coding, and that's what I've been doing. And I started to kind of create these eclectic pieces, throwing in Vasarely, throwing in the keyhole, throwing in socialist sculpture, and throwing in the, ziggurat steps. And here, Vasarely was born in the town of Pécs, and I've been going to his museum every summer. And I thought he was cornball at first, and then I fell in love with him. And I started to incorporate his crazy patterning and optical illusions with the Jaulnay glaze. This is an example of me wanting to go beyond the rectangle and make a body. So making a body with rectangles, that's the process. I'm sorry to go so fast, but I just am if you want to. And then this is another way of making a body, very much related to the architecture, socialist architecture I was surrounded by. Those green tiles are also made at the Jaulnay factory. Just another point, you see the housing estate here, and you see Devigny, an architect who was really challenging the socialist, brutalist architecture, and there's crazy architecture as a result in that town. I'll skip that. There are monuments. This is a monument to a cosmonaut who died on the Soyuz, when the Soyuz capsule landed, but I walked by it every day. So I started to use the barrel shapes in my own figures. This just shows you how constantly work is changing. It started out on the left and then it changed to the right. This idea of using these concave forms became important to me, and you'll see them reappear. And instead of doubling, I'm also, with two pieces next to each other, I'm doing the doubling in the piece. So in this piece on the left, which is mine, obviously, with the horns, there's again, there are 2 eyes, 2 breasts, or 4 breasts, or however you want to see it, combining animal with human, with architecture, with Art Deco. And there you have Fortune on the right, who really is gigantic. That's a wishing well, and that's the socialist art of, again, she has these openings that represent kind of an abundance. Cornucopia-like. A friend of mine came over to my studio and said, "Why don't you get out of the rectangle?" I was doing these rectangular things. Sometimes it just takes a few magic words to change everything. And of course, get out of the rectangle. Frank Stella got out of the rectangle. And so I started making these stacks and bodies, and that's what I'm continuing to do. And I learned from work and public art around me that instead of putting the supportive structure on the back, I brought the supportive structure in front and used my drawings and kind of drew that way. And here are 2 more. My idea was to have, these are like caryatids, but also to have them all around a room. Caryatids support a building, obviously they would, but these then were just part of a frieze too, in a way, so there are 2 of them. They are about 5 or 6 feet, depending, and they're screwed directly in the wall. And I'm gonna skip the Oscar Schlemmer influence, Triadische Ballet. Well, I don't wanna skip it altogether. This is my version of Schlemmer. If you don't know, he was a Bauhaus artist. He made costumes that restricted people's movements and was interested in the ideal human and very pro-industrialization. And I was very influenced by his figures. This is an enamel on steel. I worked in an enamel factory at a time when I couldn't work in the factory. And these are 2 of my drawings, and here is a picture of the enamel factory. They made shelves, they made signage. They worked with artists in the 70s in Hungary to make big wall pieces that are just gorgeous, and they have geometric patterns. And they were restoring one in that case. They were redoing one. This is just to give you an idea of how I work. I lay out the slabs, do a life-size drawing, roll out the slabs. It changes and changes. And here I'm interested in combining unglazed with glazed. There's just to give you a sense of scale. And I'm very influenced in learning all about Hungarian work in the 60s and 70s, paintings. So I took the form from this painting by Imre Bach and used it as the head. And then to find out, Imre Bach, of course, was influenced by Mayan imagery, and he thought there was a similarity between Mayan imagery and Hungarian folk art. He speaks about this. So here I am taking that and bringing it to another layer of kind of creating ancient futuristic beings that are double portraits. And this is very, very high relief on the left. And I'm interested in combining the mechanical with the body, the idea of gears. And at this point in our lives, that's seen as nostalgic. But there's still a fascination for me with the machine, as I know maybe with Ian. It just, there's such pleasing shapes, and they imply movement. And they apply the robotic, but in a more positive, comes from a place of strength, I think. And you can see the sexualized imagery clearly. And this is an example of a ceramic mural at the university that had a big influence on me. It was really exciting to see that was still there. Not all the socialist work is still extant. Some of it has been destroyed. And so I start to make a horizontal piece. And part of it is an homage to Eva Zeisel. I think that I've got to go fast now, but that's Eva Zeisel's belly button vase. She was invited back to Hungary. She's originally Hungarian, and I met her when she was 104. She died at 105. And so, yeah, I go more horizontal, incorporating Vasarely, incorporating the idea of, again, the animal, the futurist being, the machine. Ode to Vasarely. These are tall. I mean, this is the 27-part Lego thing I was talking about earlier. That it actually, I make templates and they actually can be installed. And then I go to compressing and condensing my ideas and working with Jolnai with its very, very shiny glaze, because I felt certain glazes work better with certain forms. And this is just about this big, but they pack a punch. They're small, they're concise. And this is Miriam Shapiro's X. So it's about almost like the body with the arms and legs akimbo, or a sexual symbol. But this Vasarely pattern, both on the tops and there I go more into architecture, Laughing Castle. I'm going to just go through these, and then you can ask me questions, because there's a Vasarely. He did a ceramic work at the factory. And I copied directly a Vasarely drawing and added the breast. I felt like I was definitely interfering purposefully with his work, eroticizing Vasarely, although some of his work is already kind of erotic. And I have to put this in because there are queer artists working in Hungary. And this artist made this, but he was clearly not seen. His work was not known as queer work at the time, but it was just shown in the fall. And I thought, oh my God, he's doing what I'm doing. But he's doing it with photographs and a quote from Vasarely, a quote from the geometry, and trying to figure out how to talk about, male desire. Or I'm doing female desire. It's like, God, that blew me away. His Karai Hopholas was part of a group of artists in Page. And then you have this. So this side, the keyhole again. This was just bought by the Everson Museum, and I'm very happy that it's going to have a good home. And dual sides. And this is just the installation shot of the show that I just had. It was perfect. It was a white box. The colors really sang. That's a close-up of a wall piece. And this is the piece you saw in the beginning. So I think I'll stop there, because if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. There's more work, but I think you've seen a lot. So, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear.
Recording, use it.
Okay, recording. Who would like to? I would love questions, any question. There's no such thing as a bad question. Because I've left a ton out.
Hi there. Thank you for this wonderful talk. I had a question regarding your connection between the monstrous and the erotic. I noticed that came up earlier in your work, and it still seems to be pretty prevalent even in your later pieces as you're sort of combining all of these elements. I was just wondering how you saw those things as being connected, or what was sort of going through your mind as you were putting those things together.
I will say, and I meant to say this, but during the Symbolist period, during the Art Nouveau period, they were very obsessed with the idea of the femme fatale, which is, you'll see it in Ferdinand Knopf's work, you'll see it in, you'll look it up. And it's sort of the idea that you fall for this woman who's going to eat you up and act like a vagina dentata. The Sphinx character itself is like that, because if you, as the story went, if you do not know the riddle, how to solve the riddle of the Sphinx, you will be asphyxiated by the Sphinx. And so there you have the Art Nouveau concept again of the femme fatale. So I'm interested in turning that on its head and say using Art Nouveau tropes, but creating a strong personality that's not necessarily the repulsive monster, but turning that into something that has to do with power.
I know you went to Pewabic yesterday,
Yes.
and I'm wondering if you had any reaction to Mary Chase Perry's Iridescence and the Hungarian.
Yeah.
Because I think they're using very different means to get to a similar but very different iridescence.
That's true. Even there's what I noticed, of course, there's a big difference between the original iridescence in Pewabic and what they can do today. They used lead. The factory at Jolnai does. These are not things to be eaten and drunk of. But I was so excited by what I saw at Pewabic, and I didn't know about Pewabic until COVID. For some reason, it wasn't on my radar. Had it been on my radar, and then I did contact them during COVID to see if I could work there or be an artist in residence, whatnot. I made no indent, and I just dropped it. It didn't happen. But I love what she did, and I think it's brilliant that she was basically asked to recreate a Persian luster and figured out how to do it with silver and bismuth and lead and often uranium. And I think, like Jolnai, the way that the tiles are used here is extraordinary. And that's what they do in Jolnai. And I loved your lecture because it's not just decorative, it's not embellishment. It becomes, in my opinion, and I'll say opinion, a really inherent part of the architecture. If something's a pattern in the roof tile, it's functional, it's part of the roof. But I was just really, really inspired. And I want to know more about her because as a woman alone, creating that factory in that time period is very unusual and tremendous. And so now I need to see more Pewabic. Now I found out about Clément Massier, Theodore Deck, there were other, and Pilkington in England and William de Morgan, and there were other people using the luster glazes at the turn of the century, but I didn't know enough about American pottery. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your talk. I think for us, one thing we're always talking about as the makers is the process of making.
Yes.
And many of us we travel as a group and we've gone to different countries and seen how everyone is what I term as solving the problem of getting things done. Maybe you can just talk to us a little bit about what it's like to be working in two separate countries and how you get that done.
Great question, because first of all, it forced me outside of my bubble of New York. Second of all, it was hard, and it's still hard. And yet, what enables me to work in Hungary is the building up of friendships and relationships. Even if you're in a tiny society where one friend hates the other friend, you're like, okay, somehow I've been able to keep a balance and give back. I've been given so much by the people in Page, from the man who let me use his studio to the head of the ceramic department in Page who let me work in the studio, Nagy Marta. She's a phenomenal human being. I've learned, and I had and still have a curiosity of how people survived under socialism or communism. How did they make it? What compromises did they have to make in their own lives to be artists? How did they maintain their integrity or not? And I think the not is definitely there. There were informers that infiltrated underground art groups. There have been people who have helped me who said, I'm helping you because I did some bad things. It gives me the chills to think about it. And I was in a comfortable place. I had the advantage of getting a teacher's salary, money to spend there. Life was cheap for me. I felt rich when I was there. I would take people out to dinner. Now the tables have turned. Our country is going through a crisis, to say the least, and learning it from Viktor Orban. But going back and forth, I think it's a really great way to live. I think the one thing that, as sculptors, we were talking about, it's not just about the product. The work is about those relationships. The work is about learning a new language. I had to learn Hungarian, and I wanted to learn Hungarian. I actually have a love of languages. It makes me happy. And it just lights up a part of my brain, God knows why. Hungarian's the hardest language I've ever tried to learn, and I never knew it was going to be so hard. And I'm a creature of habit, I guess. That's why I keep going back. But my Hungarian teacher said for the first time, and my Hungarian teacher lives in New York, but she's from the town of Pécs. Her ex-husband represented Hungary at the Venice Biennale in the 70s. She's 80. She knows everything about that era of artists and what they were doing and all the gossip and crap. And she said to me the other day, when are you going home? And I said, oh, Pécs. Yeah. So I really do feel like I have two homes. But the other thing is, we know Donald Trump is not everything in America, and we know Orban is not all of Hungary. And just trying to remember that my friends there are resisting in any way they can, and sometimes they can't. And I've learned a lot from them and their courage and their persistence. And there's a lot of art and culture going on despite the restrictions. I could talk about this for hours, but I highly recommend it because it takes you out, as we say, comfort zone. It takes you out of your comfort zone. And I was able to escape the stress of the New York art market shit, excuse my language, and I really needed to in order to make work. I needed to be somewhere else. Yeah. So, sorry for the expletive.
Well, we can certainly continue talking about this
Okay.
in the studios.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you.